Everything in this series began with a look on a path. A narrow place, two people, no choice but to see each other. That look became a feeling. The feeling became a decision. The decision became an exile. The exile became a return. The return became a murder. The murder became a guilt. The guilt became a truth. The truth became a choice. And the choice, the woman who was sent away, became this. She found another tribe. She found their chief, and she has been pointing him at you ever since. A look on a path that led to a feeling, that led to a betrayal, that led to an exile, that led to a forest, that led to a new tribe, and a return, and a shaman, and a murder, and an illness, and a death, and a resurrection, and a test, and a reckoning. 9 stories of the same small group of people becoming who they were going to be, shaped by everything that happened to them, and everything they chose. You have been shaped by all of it. The forest did not break you. The weight of the eastern forest has not stopped you from leading. The shaman arrived, and you understood what you felt, and you said it plainly, and the saying of it changed the shape of everything. The tribe is what it is now. Small, tested, held together by something harder, and more honest than it was at the beginning. You are the chief. The shaman is beside you. The tribe is behind you. And then somewhere in the forest to the east, a group of people is moving toward you that is larger than you are, and has been told. By someone who knows exactly where you are and how many of you there are and what your habits are, that you are worth taking. She walked into the forest and she found them, and she told them everything. In this story, you are the chief. The forest is yours. This is where it ends. The winter had been hard and the spring was real. You felt it first in the quality of the light, the way it changed from the flat gray of winter to something with angle and warmth, reaching further into the forest, finding the things that had been waiting under the cold for the permission to grow. The tribe felt it too. The specific loosening that came with warmer air, the easing of the constant cold management that winter required. And people moved differently in spring. The children ran instead of walked. The old man's cough had settled to almost nothing. The shaman was working in the mornings, going to the forest edge with her preparations, returning with things that smelled of green and growth. You watched her work and felt the thing you had stopped trying not to feel. The specific warmth that was hers and had been hers since the first night and would be hers for as long as there was a you to feel it. The tribe was good. This is what you thought in those early spring days. A thought that arrived with the particular quality of things that were true, and that you wanted to hold carefully, because true good things were not permanent. The tribe was good. The quick-eyed woman had become something essential. Her knowledge grown over the winter into something that approached the shamans in its practical application. The old man was old and still useful in the ways that old people were useful. The history he carried, the patterns he had seen repeat. The children were healthy. And then the birds changed, not dramatically. A shift in behavior, subtle, the kind of thing that only registered if you had spent years watching the forest's ordinary patterns and knew when those patterns deviated. Birds that normally moved in certain directions moving in others. A stillness in the eastern part of the forest that was not the stillness of winter, but a different quality. The stillness of something large being quiet on purpose. You noticed. You said nothing yet. You watched. The forest tells you things if you have learned to listen to it, not in words. And in the behavior of the things that live in it. The adjustments that animals made to the presence of other animals. The way the ordinary patterns of the living world shifted around something that did not belong in them. You had learned to read these shifts in the exile, alone, with nothing else to read. You were reading them now, and what they were saying was not comfortable. She came to you on the 3rd morning, early, before the tribe was fully awake, at the forest edge where you had both taken to meeting in the mornings. The time that belonged to the two of you before the day made its claims. She sat beside you, and she did not begin with the ordinary things. "Something is coming," she said. Not a question, not even quite a statement. The specific quality of a person reporting what they had received. The channel open, the information arriving whether it was wanted or not. "From the east," you said. She looked at you. "You felt it too." "The birds," you said. "3 days." She nodded. Then she said the thing that turned the birds from a general unease into something specific. "I went to the other place last night," she said. "I asked it to show me what was coming. You waited." "I saw a face," she said. "Or in the dark, among the shapes, a face I recognized." You already knew. The knowing had been sitting at the edge of your understanding since the birds changed. The specific quality of an approaching threat that felt familiar, that had a shape you had seen before. You knew, and you had not let yourself know fully, because the knowing carried implications you had not been ready to carry. "Her," you said. Not a question. "Her," the shaman said. You sat with this for a moment. The morning forest around you, the birds doing what birds did, the spring light coming through the new leaves above. She had walked into the forest. She had found another tribe. She had found their chief, who would be a man of a certain kind. The kind that a woman of her particular skills could assess and approach and offer something to. Information. Knowledge of the terrain, of your numbers, of your habits and your roots, and the places where you were strong, and the places where you were not. She had been pointing a tribe at you. How long? Since winter, perhaps. Since the autumn. Long enough to have been thorough. She was always thorough. You had sent her away with the single word, and she had found the only response available to her, which was to make herself indispensable to someone who had the power to respond in kind. This was exactly what she had always done. You had known who she was. You had chosen her once for exactly this quality, and had sent her away later for the same quality directed somewhere else. Now it was directed at you. You could not claim to be surprised. You could only prepare. You told the tribe that evening, all of them. You had always believed in telling the tribe what it needed to know, had built your leadership on the understanding that people who knew the truth could prepare for it, and people who did not know it could not. The truth was this. A larger group was moving toward them from the east, and the movement had been directed by someone who knew them well. You watched their faces as you told it. The quick-eyed woman first understood, then her face went to the calculating place, the place she went when she was assessing a situation for what it actually required. The old man was quiet, which meant he was thinking. The children were held by their mothers. The adults closing around them automatically. The protective instinct that needed no instruction. Then you told them the rest. How many, approximately, based on what the forest was telling you, and how they were moving, the direction, and the pace. How long before they arrived, if they kept their current approach, and what you intended to do about it. You were not going to run. Running meant abandoning the camp, the winter stores, the shelter you had built and reinforced over seasons of work. Running meant finding new ground in spring, when the best ground was already claimed, with a tribe that included children and an old man. Running was a choice that had consequences that survival could not afford. You were going to fight, not in the open, not in the way that a larger group fought a smaller group, which was badly for the smaller group. In the forest, in your forest, the one you had learned over years of exile and hunting, and walking its paths at night, on ground that you knew and they did not. You would need every advantage the forest could give you. You looked at the shaman. She looked back. A tribe of 15 people defending against a tribe of perhaps 30 or 40 was not a fight anyone would choose. But the tribe of 15 had things the tribe of 30 did not have. They had the shaman. They had a chief who had spent 40 days alone in this forest and knew it the way he knew his own hands. They had the quick-eyed woman and the old man and the children who would be protected, and that protection would make every adult fight, at the full limit of what they had. They had each other, tested and real. Numbers were not everything. You had 2 days. 2 days in which the tribe became something it had not been before, organized for the specific purpose of defending a piece of ground against a larger force. You had never done this. None of them had. But preparation was preparation, and you had been preparing for difficult things your whole life. You walked the ground with the quick-eyed woman, the two of you reading the terrain the way you read hunting terrain, for what it offered and what it denied. The approaches from the east narrowed in 2 places, natural funnels where the trees grew close and the undergrowth was dense. A group moving through those places would be moving slowly and in a line, unable to spread. You marked the places in your memory. Then, you marked them physically, small signs that the tribe would recognize and the approaching group would not. And the old man knew things about fire that you had not known he knew. The specific ways it could be directed, the materials that burned fast and materials that burned slow, the difference between fire as warmth and fire as weapon. He had been young once in a different tribe, and the things that happened in that tribe had taught him things he had never spoken of until now. You listened to him with the full attention of someone who needed every piece of knowledge available. The shaman went to the forest. She went alone and came back changed, in the way she was always changed by her work, the residue of the other place on her, the slightly more permeable quality. She told you what she had done in the forest without telling you in detail, because the detail was hers and what you needed was the result. The forest knew you were there. That was the result. The living world, the trees and the roots and the deep ground, had been given a direction. Not a human direction, something older and less precise and more fundamental. The forest knew you were defending it, and it would respond accordingly. You did not ask her what that meant exactly. You had learned to trust what she told you. Preparation is the only form of courage that is entirely under your control. What happens in the moment of danger is not under your control, the fear and the noise and the specific unpredictability of what other people do when they are frightened and dangerous. But the 2 days before, the walking of the ground and the placing of the things and the knowing of what you know and the trust in the people beside you, all of that is yours. You used the 2 days completely. At the night before they came, you sat at the fire with the tribe, not planning. The planning was done, not speaking about what tomorrow would bring, because what tomorrow would bring was known as well as it could be known, and speaking about it further would only grow the fear without adding anything to the preparation. You sat together. The quick-eyed woman was sharpening something with a stone, the rhythmic sound of it familiar and grounding. The old man was sitting with his eyes closed, whether sleeping or thinking, you could not tell, and it did not matter. The children were asleep. The mothers staying close, the fathers positioned without being asked at the outer edges of the group. The shaman was beside you. Her hand found yours in the way it had found yours at the dying fire, unhurried, simply present. You held it and looked at the fire and felt the tribe around you and the forest around the tribe, and the 2 days of preparation settled into your bones as readiness, which was the only form that preparation could take on the night before. You thought about the path, the narrow path in the forest, a long time ago, and a woman coming the other way, and a look that lasted less than a breath. You had not chosen what you felt in that moment. You had not chosen any of what followed. The exile and the forest and the new tribe and the return. The shaman arriving out of the east. The murder. The illness. The truth. None of it had been chosen. All of it had been responded to. Decision by decision. Each one growing from the one before. This was the last response in the chain. Tomorrow. The fire burned. The tribe breathed around you. The shaman's hand was warm in yours. On the night before the thing that could end everything, what you feel is not what you expect to feel. You expect fear, and the fear is there, real and honest. the body's knowledge of what tomorrow contains. But underneath the fear is something else, something that has been building since the exile, since the forest, since the first fire with the new tribe. The knowledge of what you are. Not the role, not the chief, not the person the tribe needed you to be. You, the actual you, the one the forest made and the shaman saw, and the tribe followed not because they had to, but because they chose to. Tomorrow, you will fight for all of it. Tonight, you know exactly what all of it is. Sleep came. Surprisingly, it came. The birds told you before the light did. You were awake already, the pre-dawn dark still fully present, when the birds in the eastern forest went silent. Not the gradual quieting of birds settling for the night, but the abrupt cessation of a living system removing itself from proximity to something that frightened it. The silence spread from east to west, and you felt it arrive at the camp the way you felt weather arrive. A change in the quality of the air. You were on your feet. No words needed. The tribe had been sleeping lightly. The sleep of people who had prepared for something and were waiting for it to begin. The silence brought them awake the way the birds had brought you awake. The body knowing before the mind caught up. Eyes. The tribe's eyes finding yours in the dark. You moved your hands. So the signals you had established over the 2 days of preparation, simple and unambiguous. The positions and the movements that each person needed to take. They moved without sound. The specific quiet of people who had been in this forest long enough to know how to move in it. The shaman touched your arm as she passed. A single touch, brief, containing everything it needed to contain. Then she was gone into the trees. You went to your position. The moment before a fight is the longest moment. The preparation is done. The positions are taken. The thing that is coming and cannot be stopped, now only met. You crouch in your place in the dark, and you hear the forest telling you with every sound it is not making that something large is moving through it from the east. Something that does not know this ground. Something that is following the direction of someone who knows this ground very well and has told it where to go. They came through the first narrow place in the trees just as the light was beginning. Not full light, the gray before sunrise, enough to see shapes, not enough to see faces. They were moving in a line the way you had predicted, the terrain forcing them into single file, and there were more of them than you had estimated, perhaps 40, perhaps more, the line of them stretching back into the trees, further than you could see. You let the front of the line pass. This was the hardest thing. The instinct was to respond to the first threat, the nearest body, the immediate presence. You waited, let them come further into the narrow place, further from the open ground behind them, deeper into the ground that was yours. Then the old man's fire came from the left, not large, precise. The specific materials he had prepared over 2 days, burning fast and bright and directed, catching the dry undergrowth at the edge of the narrow way and running along it with a speed that surprised even you who had been told to expect it. The line stopped. The front of it and the back of it were suddenly separated by fire, and the middle of it was in a place it did not know with fire on one side, and the specific disorientation of people who had been moving with confidence and were suddenly not moving at all. The quick-eyed woman moved from the right. She was extraordinary. You had known she was capable, and watching her in this moment, you understood that capable was insufficient. And she moved through the confusion with the precision of someone who had been in this forest every day for seasons, and knew every root and every gap and every shadow, and the people she was moving against did not have any of that, and the difference was everything. Then, the forest itself responded. You felt it before you saw it. The ground trembling slightly, not enough to knock anyone down, enough to register, the deep roots of the old trees responding to something the shaman had given them. Branches moving in the windless air, not in the direction the absent wind would have moved them. Undergrowth thickening at the edges of the narrow way, Not dramatically, just enough, the living world making itself slightly less passable. The attacking group was not a bad group. They had numbers, and they had weapons, and they had come with intention. But intention in a place you do not know against people who know it completely is not the same as intention in open ground. They were fighting the terrain as much as they were fighting you, and the terrain was on your side. War is not glory. It is noise and woke and the specific chaos of people trying to harm each other in a confined space. And it is fear, real fear, the body's honest response to the presence of death moving through the air around you. You are afraid. You have been afraid since the birds went silent. The fear does not stop you. You have learned through everything this series has put you through that being afraid and continuing are not opposites. You continue. The tribe continues beside you. The fighting lasted longer than you had hoped, and shorter than you had feared. In the narrow place and the fire and the confusion, the larger group's advantage of numbers was reduced to something manageable, not eliminated. People were hurt. The young man on the far left took a blow that put him down briefly before he was up again, moving differently, one arm not fully responding. The quick-eyed woman had blood on her face from somewhere, moving too fast for you to assess whether it was hers. You were in the center of it. This was where a chief was, not directing from behind, not managing from a safe distance. In the center, where the tribe could see you and draw from the seeing of you the specific courage that came from watching someone who was not running. You fought with the skills you had, and the years of hunting and the exile and the return, the knowledge of how a body moved and where it was vulnerable, and what the specific moment of hesitation looked like in another person's body before they committed to a direction. The shaman was in the trees. You could not see her, but you could feel her, the way you had learned to feel her, the specific quality of her attention, directed like something physical. The forest continued to respond, small things, constant, the accumulated effect of a living world that had been given a direction. Roots slightly more present underfoot for people who did not know where they were. Branches at the wrong height for people who did not know this canopy. The light through the trees falling in ways that helped you and complicated them. The attacking group was good. Their chief, whoever he was, it had prepared them, and they were fighting with discipline and intention. But discipline and intention were not enough to overcome the ground and the fire, and the woman who moved through their flanks like water, and the specific implacability of a tribe that was fighting for everything it had built. They began to pull back, not breaking, not running, retreating with the organized movement of people who had made a decision. The fire had burned down to something manageable. The narrow place was clearing. They were moving back toward the east, toward the open ground, toward the territory they knew. The moment you understand you are going to survive is its own particular experience. It does not feel like victory. Not yet. It feels like the sudden awareness of your own body, all the places it hurts that the fighting had suppressed, had the shaking in the hands that had been steady for the duration and are now allowed to shake. You watch them pull back, and you feel the tribe around you doing the same thing. The specific collective exhale of people who have been holding everything they have and are now permitted to loosen slightly. They pulled back to the open ground at the edge of the eastern forest. You followed to the tree line, no further. The advantage was gone beyond the trees, and you had no intention of losing in the open what you had held in the forest. You stood at the edge of your ground and watched them assemble in the morning light. 40-something people. More than you. Hurt, some of them. The fire and the quick-eyed woman in the forest having done their work. Their chief was visible at the front of them. A large man, not old. It with the quality of someone who had led before and had not expected this particular outcome today. He looked at you. You looked back. There was a conversation in that looking. The conversation that two leaders had when a fight had gone the way this one had gone. No words. The assessment of what had happened and what it meant and what came next. He had come here with information that had told him This would be straightforward. The information had been wrong. Not wrong about your location or your numbers, that information had been accurate. Wrong about what your numbers were capable of on their own ground. He turned and said something to the people around him. And then you saw her. She was at the back of the group. Not fighting, never fighting. That was not her function. Her function was what it had always been. The reading of situations. The provision of information. The positioning of herself beside the power that could most use what she offered. She was looking at you. Across the open ground, in the morning light. With 40 people between you, she was looking at you with the face you had known for years. The intelligent face, the calculating face, the face that assessed everything it looked at and filed the assessment for use. You looked back. There was nothing in the looking that needed to be said. Everything had already been said, in the exile and the return and the test and the word you had spoken in the camp on a morning that felt distant now. The looking was simply the closing of something that had opened a long time ago. She looked at you for a long moment. Then she turned away. The group moved east, into the trees, into the forest that was theirs, taking their wounded with them, taking the knowledge that this ground was not available to them. You watched them go. She had done what she was built to do. She had read the situation and found the power available to her and aligned herself with it and directed it as precisely as she could. It had not been enough, not because she had failed in her particular skill, which she had not, but because what she had pointed the power at was something she had underestimated. The way you underestimated things when you had been part of them and thought you knew their limits. She knew your numbers. She did not know what your numbers had become. You turned back to the forest. The tribe was there, assembling at the tree line, the specific gathering of people who have been through something together and are now checking on each other. The quick-eyed woman's blood was hers, a cut above her eye from a branch or a blow, not deep. She was already looking at it with the practical attention of someone who had been learning from the shaman for months. The young man with the damaged arm was sitting against a tree, the shaman beside him, her hands doing what her hands did. You counted. Everyone was there. This was the thing you counted first, before the wounds and the damage, the simple fact of everyone present and alive. 15 people. All of them, here, in the morning light of the spring forest. You let yourself feel this for a moment. The relief of it, enormous and specific, and the particular quality of a fear that had been present since the birds went silent and was now released. 15 people, the old man sitting on a root with his eyes closed, and a slight expression that on another face might have been called satisfaction. The children brought from their hiding place in the deep forest by the woman who had stayed with them, wide-eyed, wanting to understand what had happened, held by adults who would explain it to them in time. The shaman finished with the young man's arm. She stood and came to you. She looked at you with the look that assessed everything, and the look that was only ever yours. You were hurt somewhere along your right side. You had not let yourself notice during the fighting, and she found it with her hands, before you showed her where it was, which was exactly what she did, and always had done. Sit, she said. You sat. She worked. The tribe moved around you. The ordinary work of after, the assessment and the tending and the slow process of a group returning to itself after something that had required everything from it. The fire was rebuilt. Someone brought water. The old man opened his eyes and said something that made 2 of the younger adults laugh. The short, surprised laugh of people who had not expected to laugh today. This is what survives. Not the dramatic moment, not the fighting and the fear, not the fire in the narrow place or the shaman's forest or the face across the open ground. What survives is this: the fire, the people around it, the ordinary sounds of a group that is still here. All the stories that brought you to this morning, At the look on the path and the exile and the return and the murder and the truth and the test, all of it was in service of this, a tribe, alive, at a fire, in the spring. By evening the camp was quiet with the quiet of exhaustion and relief. The wounded were tended. The children were sleeping. The specific deep sleep of children who had been frightened and held and had eventually understood that the frightening was over. The adults were at the fire, not talking much. The silence of people who had shared something that did not need to be discussed yet. That would be discussed in time, in many conversations over many evenings. Becoming the story the tribe told about itself. You sat at the fire. The shaman was beside you. Her work was done for the day. The wounded stable. The tribe's immediate needs addressed. She sat with the quality she always had at the end of a day's work. Present and slightly elsewhere. The channel never fully closed. The quick-eyed woman met your eyes across the fire.
She had a bandage above her eye, and she looked exhausted and completely herself, which was the most reassuring thing you had seen all day. She raised her chin slightly, the gesture that meant something between acknowledgement and approval. The old man was talking to one of the younger ones, low and continuous. The specific tone of someone transmitting something. The history of this day being given to someone who would carry it forward. This was how it had always been done. The only archive available. The living voice passing the living record to the next living voice. You looked at the fire. You thought about the path, the narrow path in the forest, the look that had lasted less than a breath, the warmth that had stayed in your chest for the rest of that day. You had not known then what that look was the beginning of. That you had not known it was the beginning of anything. It had simply happened the way things happened, the living world doing what it did without announcing itself. Everything that followed had been a response. The exile and the forest and the shaman and the murder and the guilt and the truth and today. One long chain of response stretching from a moment on a path to this fire on a spring evening with a tribe that was still here. The shaman put her head on your shoulder. This was new, not the hand. The hand had happened before. This was the specific weight of a person choosing to rest against another person. The gesture that said, I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and this is where I am. You felt her weight against you, and the fire and the tribe around you and the forest at the edges and the spring night coming down over everything. Every story has to start somewhere. Ours started with a look. Not a dramatic look. Not a look anyone watching would have noticed. A fraction of a second on a narrow path between two people who had no particular reason to look at each other. From that look came everything in this series. 10 stories of the same small group of people becoming what they were going to become. The look was not the cause of all of it. It was the first stone placed, and the stones placed themselves after it in the directions that the living world moved, which was always toward what was real, and always toward what was needed, and sometimes at great cost to everyone involved. The fire burned. The tribe slept. You stayed awake a little longer. The shaman's weight against your shoulder. The spring forest at the edges of the firelight. Full of everything it had always been full of. In the east, somewhere, a group of people moving away from here with the knowledge that this ground was not available. And somewhere among them, a woman who had been part of this story since its first page, carrying everything she carried, finding the next thing. You did not think about her with anger. You did not think about her with grief. You thought about her the way you thought about the forest, as something real that had its own nature and its own direction, and would continue in that direction, with or without your understanding of it. She would find the next thing, she always had, and you were here. You were here, and the tribe was here, and the shaman's weight was on your shoulder, and the fire was burning, and the story that had started with a look on a path had arrived at this. This was enough. This was more than enough.
Intergroup violence in prehistoric human populations is well documented. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites across Europe and Asia shows signs of organized conflict between groups during the Upper Paleolithic, including wounds consistent with weapons, mass burials, and the fortification of campsites. What drove such conflicts is less clear. Resource competition, territorial disputes, and the accumulation of grievances between neighboring groups all appear in the archaeological and anthropological record. The role of individual human decisions, the specific choices made by specific people that set events in motion, is harder to see in the evidence, but was certainly present. The chain of cause and effect in this series, from a look on a path to a tribal conflict, is not historically documented. It is, however, historically plausible. Small decisions in small groups have always had consequences that exceeded their apparent scale. A look, a feeling, a choice, an exile. These were the kinds of events that shaped the lives of everyone in a group of 20 or 30 people whose survival depended on the stability of that group. The shaman in this series is fictional in her specific abilities, but representative of a real and important role in prehistoric communities. The chief is fictional, but representative of a real kind of leadership, earned rather than inherited, held by competence rather than birth, accountable to the group that gave it. The woman who was exiled twice is fictional. She may be the most human character in this series. Thank you for spending 10 stories with this tribe. They were here, or people very much like them were here, 50,000 years ago, living their lives in a forest that is still standing. What they felt is what you feel. It has always been what you feel. It will always be what you feel. The words for it came later. The feeling was always there first. Good night.